descended through clouds of purple and gold as Dane Cole pressed his face against the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. Below him stretched the Celestial Academy, a sprawling complex of crystal towers and floating gardens that had existed for 10,000 years. He had seen pictures of Prime and training videos, but nothing had prepared him for the real thing. Esther placed a hand on his shoulder. She was a woman in her late 50s with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that had seen 100 negotiations crawl a dozen worlds. She smiled at his wonder, but kept her own expression calm and professional. First time off Earth, she asked. He nodded. First time past the moon, actually. I still cannot believe I am here. Earned it. Your translation work on the trade agreements was excellent. The council specifically requested you for the delegation. Felt his cheeks warm. He was 28 years old and had spent most of his career behind a desk, translating documents and filing reports. He was not a scientist or a diplomat or a soldier. He was just a language specialist who happened to be good at understanding how different species thought. The ship landed with a gentle bump. The delegation gathered their belongings and filed out onto a platform made of something that looked like glass but felt warm under their feet. Representatives from other species were arriving too. Dane counted at least 8 different types of aliens within his first minute on the ground. Gage walked past in their flowing silver robes. They were tall and thin with skin that shifted color based on their emotion. Right now they glowed a soft blue, which Dane knew meant they were feeling confident. Behind them came the stocky beings covered in hard plates that clicked when they moved. Their live priests wore chains of small crystals around their necks, each crystal containing centuries of recorded wisdom. A group flowed by in their environmental spheres. They were aquatic beings who could not survive in open air, so they traveled in bubbles of water held together by force fields. Danny had worked with translators before and found them polite but difficult to read. Esther led the human delegation toward the main building. Dr. Lisa Park walked beside her, a physicist in her 40s who had been chosen to represent human intellect at the symposium. Behind them came various aides and assistants, including Danny. The hall of the academy took his breath away. The ceiling rose so high that clouds actually formed near the top. Statues of famous thinkers from across the galaxy lined the walls. Dan recognized a few from his studies, but most were unknown to him. Humans had only achieved fat-than-light travel 40 years ago. They were still newcomers to the galactic community. Phil greeted them at the door. They were perhaps the oldest species still active in galactic affairs. They had 4 arms, 4 eyes, and skin that looked like cracked stone. This particular official was young by standards, only 300 years old. Welcome to the Symposium of Sentience, the official said in perfect English. Your quarters have been prepared. The opening ceremony begins in 6 hours. Spent those 6 hours exploring. He wandered through gardens where plants sang to each other in frequencies that made his teeth tingle. He visited a library where knowledge was stored not in books, but in living crystals that whispered their contents directly into your mind. He ate lunch in a cafeteria that served food from 200 different worlds. Where he went, he listened. He heard mathematicians debating equations that supposedly proved the existence of 11 dimensions. He heard like priests arguing about whether artificial intelligence could ever truly think. He heard philosophers discussing the nature of individual identity within a collective consciousness. And everywhere he went, he heard one name repeated with something close to religious reverence, the Elder. A philosopher who had lived for over 900 years. He had taught kings and scientists and prophets. He had written books that changed how entire civilizations understood themselves. And he was famous for one thing above all else, his riddle. In 6 centuries traveling from world to world, posing riddles to the finest minds of every species he encountered. Some of these riddles had been solved after years of effort. Others remained mysteries to the day. But one riddle in particular had never been answered. Not once. Not by any being in the known galaxy. Learned all of this from a maintenance worker named. A 4-armed being who mopped floors and apparently knew everything about everyone at the academy. Say you will pose the riddle one final time, told Danny while cleaning a window. Then he will retire. This is the last chance for anyone to solve it. What happens if someone does solve it? Danny asked. A sound that might have been a laugh. The species that solves it gets a permanent seat on the Council of Wisdom. Very prestigious, very powerful. But do not hold your breath, young human. Mine's far greater than yours have tried and failed. He did not take offense. He knew his place in the hierarchy. He was here to translate and assist, nothing more. The opening ceremony was held in a vast amphitheater carved from a single piece of blue crystal. Thousands of beings filled the seats, representing every major species in the galactic community. Danny sat near the back with the other assistants, craning his neck to see the stage. Esther gave a brief speech on behalf of humanity. She spoke about cooperation and shared knowledge and the hope that all species might learn from one another. The audience applauded politely but without enthusiasm. Humans were still newcomers. They had not yet proven themselves worthy of real respect. Then took the stage. Moved slowly, his ancient body supported by a staff made of twisted metal. His 4 eyes scanned the crowd with an intelligence that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. When he spoke, his voice was soft but somehow carried to every corner of the amphitheater. I've taught for 900 years, he said. I have posed 10,000 riddles to 10,000 minds. Most of those riddles have been solved. Most of those minds have found their answers. But one riddle remains. One question has never been answered. The crowd leaned forward as one. One morning, I will pose this riddle one final time. I will give you 5 days to find the answer. Choose your champions wisely. Prepare your finest fingers. This will be my last gift to the galaxy. Raised his 4 arms in a gesture of blessing. May wisdom find you all. And walked back to his quarters in silence, his mind already turning over the possibilities. He told himself it was none of his business. He was just a translator. The riddle was meant for minds like Dr. Park, not for ordinary people like him. Sleep did not come easily that night. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of puzzles without solutions and questions without answers. Somewhere in those dreams, his grandfather smiled at him and said, "The best answer to any question is another question." He woke with those words echoing in his mind, unsure what they meant but certain somehow that they mattered. And Assembly Hall was filled beyond capacity when Danny arrived the next morning. Beings stood in the aisles and crowded the doorways. Holographic translators flowed throughout the chamber, converting every word into hundreds of languages simultaneously. He found a spot near the back wall where he could see the stage without blinding anyone else. He held a small recording device in his hand, ready to capture everything for ambassadors to report. The stage had been arranged with 12 platforms, each one designed for a different species. The champion stood on a platform of soft light. He was their greatest quantum mathematician, a being named who had solved equations that other species could not even understand. His skin shifted through shades of gold, indicating supreme confidence. It sent their most accomplished live priest, a female named whose chain of crystals hung nearly to the floor. Each crystal represented a century of study. She stood perfectly still, her played body reflecting the lights above. It flowed in a large environmental sphere that held 12 individuals linked together mentally. They thought as one mind, processing information at speeds that made even computers jealous. Their tentacles waved slowly in the water, creating patterns that some said held meanings too complex for other species to grasp. Lisa Park represented humanity. She stood on her platform with quiet dignity, aware that most of the crowd considered her species too young to compete seriously. Her field was theoretical physics, and she had spent weeks preparing for the moment. Watch the other champions too. The representative was a massive being covered in thick fur, known for solving problems through pure intuition rather than logic. The champion was a small creature with huge eyes that could supposedly see patterns in random noise. Each species had sent their best there, their most decorated thinkers. Through a side door, moving slowly to the center of the stage, the crowd fell silent immediately. Even the collective stopped their constant mental chatter. You all for coming, said. His voice was calm and unhurried. I have posed the riddle to 417 species over 600 years. Mathematicians have attacked it with numbers. Philosophers have attacked it with logic. Mystics have attacked it with meditation. All have failed. Paused, letting his words sink in. If you believe your species will be different. Some of you believe your champion has the special insight that others lacked. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps today is the day my riddle finally finds its answer. The pause, Danny felt his heart beating faster. As the riddle said, listen carefully for I will speak it only once. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. I'm always coming but never arrive. I am always present but never here. Every species chases me, but the moment you catch me, I no longer exist. What am I? He wrote the words down quickly, his hand moving without conscious thought. Around him, beings murmured and whispered. The champions on stage had already begun working. Closed his eyes and began running calculations. His skin flickered through colors too fast to follow, each shade representing a different mathematical operation. Danny had read that mathematicians could model entire universes in their mind. Entered a meditative trance. Her crystal began to glow softly as she accessed centuries of accumulated wisdom. Like priests believed that every problem had a logical solution, and that sufficient reasoning would always find it. Split in groups, each group exploring a different possible answer. Their tentacles waved frantically as they debated internally, 12 minds working as one, but approaching the problem from 12 different angles. Park stared at the ceiling, her lips moving silently as she thought. Dan wished he could help her somehow, but this was far beyond his abilities. Past, the crowd grew restless. Some beings left to eat or rest, then returned to see if anything had changed. The morning of the second day, the champion offered the first answer. The answer is time, she declared. Time is always coming but never arrives. Time is always present but never here. We chase time constantly, but we can never truly get it. While gently, a thoughtful answer. But consider, time does arrive. Every moment that was once the future eventually becomes the present. Time does not cease to exist when we experience it. Time continues regardless of whether we get it or not. Champion bowed her head in defeat. The third day, they presented his answer. The answer is infinity, he said. Infinity is always approaching but never reaches its destination. Infinity is present in every calculation but cannot pinpoint it. The moment you define infinity, it becomes finite and therefore no longer infinite. Slowly, elegant reasoning, but infinity is a mathematical concept, not an experience. The riddle speaks of something that species chase. No one chases infinity. They use it as a tool. It does not fit the criteria. Skin turned a deep purple, the color of shame. The fourth day, the collective stood together. The answer is tomorrow. Tomorrow is always coming but never arrives because when it arrives, it becomes today. Tomorrow is always present in our minds but never actually here. We chase tomorrow constantly, playing for it, but the moment we catch it, it is no longer tomorrow. Silent for a long moment. You have come closer than most, but tomorrow is simply a label we place on a second of time. Tomorrow does exist. It simply exists under a different name. When tomorrow arrives, it becomes today, but the day itself still exists. The thing described in my riddle truly ceases to exist when caught. Collective deflated visibly, their tentacles drooping in disappointment. He had stopped recording. He spent the fourth day wandering the academy, thinking about the riddle constantly. He talked about it with everyone he met. He discussed it with kitchen workers and gardeners and cleaning staff. None of them had answers, but all of them had opinions. There's a trick, said a cook from the. There is no answer. He is testing whether we will admit that. It's something spiritual, said a gardener with green skin. Something about the soul or consciousness. Listen to them all. He turned the riddle over in his mind again and again, examining it from every angle. At night, Dr. Park called a meeting of the human delegation. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from lack of sleep. Solve it, she admitted. I have tried every approach I know. Physics cannot explain it. Mathematics cannot model it. I am sorry, Ambassador, I have failed. Ambassador placed a hand on her shoulder. You tried your best. No one can ask for more. He sat in the corner, still turning the riddle over in his mind. Something nagged at him. Something felt wrong about the whole approach. Every champion was trying to find a thing that matched the description. But what if the description itself was the point? Ambassador, Dan said quietly, may I have permission to speak with privately? One turned to look at him. Dr. Park seemed surprised. Ambassador raised an eyebrow. Why, the ambassador asked. I do not think I can solve the riddle, Dan said, but I have some questions about it. Questions that might help me understand. Ambassador studied him for a long moment, then she nodded. Mission granted, but Danny, please do not embarrass us. He bowed his head. I will do my best, Ambassador. Left the meeting room and walked into the night, his mind racing with questions he could not quite put into words. Somewhere out there, weighed with a riddle that had defeated galaxies. He did not have answers, but for the first time in his life, he wondered if perhaps that was exactly the point. The garden sat at the top of the Academy's oldest tower. Dan climbed 300 stairs to reach it, because the elevator was reserved for beings of importance. By the time he reached the top, his legs burned and his breath came in short gaps. In itself made the climb worthwhile. Bioluminescent plants cast soft blue and purple light across winding paths of polished stone. Water trickled somewhere nearby, creating a gentle music that seemed to wash away the noise of the world below. Strange flowers opened and closed as Dan passed, their petals tracking his movement like curious eyes. And on a bench made of living wood, his four arms folded across his chest, he watched Dan approach with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been amusement. It was difficult to tell. The human translator said, I have been expecting you. He stopped a respectful distance away and bowed. You knew I was coming. Many things. I knew someone from your delegation would seek me out eventually. I did not expect it to be you rather than Dr. Park. Dr. Park is trying to solve your riddle. I am not. Four eyes narrowed slightly. Then why are you here? Took a deep breath. I want to ask you questions about the riddle, not to find the answer, but to understand the riddle itself. For a long moment said nothing. Then he gestured to a spot on the ground near his bench. Sit, ask your question. He sat cross-legged on the cool stone. He had prepared his questions carefully, but now that the moment had arrived, he found himself struggling to put them into words. 600 years, Dang said slowly. How many beings have come to ask you questions about the riddle? The sound that might have been a laugh. You are the first. First in 600 years. The other being has come to give me answers. They arrive certain that they have solved what others could not. They present their solutions with pride and confidence. When I explain why they are wrong, they leave in shame or anger. Not one has ever asked me anything. He nodded slowly. This confirmed what he had suspected. Second question, Dan said. Does the answer change depending on who is asking? Silent for a very long time. The bioluminescent plant seemed to dim slightly, as if the garden itself was holding its breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. Continue. Felt his heart racing but forced himself to remain calm. Every species approaches your riddle through their own way of thinking. The sea mathematics, the sea logic, the sea collective reasoning. Humans see metaphors and stories. We all hear the same words, but we understand them differently. This is true, said. The riddle is not really about finding a thing that fits the description. The riddle is about how we search for answers. Leaned forward slightly, his four eyes studied Danny with new intensity. What makes you say this? Grandfather was a farmer, Danny said. He grew corn and wheat on a small piece of land in a place called Kansas. He never traveled off Earth. He never met an alien. He could not do mathematics or logic or quantum physics, but he was the person I ever knew. What did he teach you? Taught me that the best answer to any question is another question. He said that people spend their whole lives looking for answers when they should be learning to ask better questions. Answers close doors. Questions open them. Nothing, but Danny saw something change in his expression. The amusement was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like hope. Now think your riddle has an answer, Danny said. I think the riddle is a test, but not the kind of test everyone believes it is. The champions are trying to prove how smart they are by solving it. But maybe the real test is whether someone can recognize that some things cannot be solved. Silence that followed seemed to last for hours. Dan began to worry that he had overstepped, that he had offended this ancient being with his foolish human speculation. Stood up, his movements were slow and deliberate. He walked to Dan and reached down with one of his forehands. Dan, he said. Dan stood. We'll come to the final assembly tomorrow morning, said. You will stand on the stage with the champions. But I am not a champion, I am just a translator. Far more than you know, Dan Cole, far more than you know. Dan walked deeper into his garden, leaving Danny alone with the glowing plants and the trickling water. He made his way back down the 300 stairs in a daze. His mind was spinning with questions he could not answer and possibilities he could not understand. What had just happened? What had he said that affected so deeply? When he reached the human quarters, he found Ambassador waiting for him. Her expression was unreadable. And she said, what did you do? Just ask questions, Ambassador. I did not try to solve the riddle. Send a message to the symposium organizer. He says he wants you on stage tomorrow. He says you have come closer to the truth than anyone in 6th century. Felt the blood drain from his face. That is not possible. I did not answer anything. Nevertheless, the request has been made. The other delegations are furious. They are demanding an explanation. They are threatening to leave the symposium entirely. He sank into the chair. That was not what he wanted. He was not a champion. He was not special. He was just a translator who talked too much and thought too hard about things that were not his business. Badger sat down across from him. Her expression softened slightly. I need to know, do you actually understand something about this riddle? He thought about his grandfather. He thought about questions and answers. He thought about the way every species had approached the riddle as a problem to be conquered rather than a mystery to be explored. I think so, he said finally. But it is not an answer. It is more like an understanding. I cannot prove it mathematically or logically. I can only explain how I see it. Is it enough to satisfy? I do not know. I hope so. Badger reached out and placed her hand on his. Then I hope so too. Get some sleep, Danny. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. He went to his room and lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. His mind kept returning to the riddle, turning it over and over like a stone in his palm. Always coming but never arrive. I am always present but never here. Every species chases me, but the moment you catch me, I no longer exist. Closed his eyes and saw his grandfather standing in a field of golden wheat, smiling that gentle smile that Dan remembered from childhood. Best answer to any question, his grandfather said, is another question. Finally understood. He did not have the answer because there was no answer, and somehow, impossibly, that was exactly what had been waiting for someone to realize. Or he would stand before the greatest minds in the galaxy and explain something that could not be explained, answer something that could not be answered, and solve something that could not be solved. He had never been more terrified in his life. Beneath the terror, he felt something else, something that felt almost like peace. Fell asleep just before dawn, and for the first time in days, he did not dream. An assembly hall had never been so crowded. Beings stood in every available space, packed together in ways that would have been uncomfortable under normal circumstances. Holographic screens flowed above the crowd, projecting images of the stage to those too far away to see directly. Walked through a side entrance, escorted by two officials. His human delegation sat in the front row. Ambassador gave him an encouraging nod. Dr. Park looked confused but supportive. The other assistants stared at him with expressions ranging from disbelief to envy. Champions stood on their platforms, watching Danny with undisguised hostility. They had turned a deep shade of red that Danny knew meant anger. They stood with her arms crossed, her played face unreadable. The collective rippled with agitation inside their environmental sphere. Took his place on an empty platform near the center of the stage. He was acutely aware that he was wearing simple clothes while everyone around him wore ceremonial robes or official uniforms. He looked exactly like what he was, an ordinary person who did not belong here. From the opposite side of the stage, the crowd fell silent immediately. Even the angry champions held their tongues in the presence of the ancient philosopher. You all for your patience, said. I know many of you are confused. Some of you are angry. You came here expecting a contest of intellects, and instead you see a young human standing among your greatest minds. It was rippled through the crowd. Danny felt thousands of eyes turning toward him, judging him, dismissing him. posed my riddle to 417 species over 600 years, continued. The finest mathematicians have tried to solve it with equation. The greatest logicians have tried to solve it with reasoning. The deepest mystics have tried to solve it with meditation. All have failed. Paused and turned to face Dane directly. Last night this human came to my garden. He did not come to give me an answer. He came to ask me questions. In 600 years, he is the first being to do so. Silence in the hall was absolute. Cole said, "Please explain to this assembly what you understand about my riddle." His mouth went dry. His legs felt weak. He had never spoken to more than a dozen people at once, and now millions were watching through various broadcasts across the galaxy. He took a deep breath and thought of his grandfather. He thought of wheat fields and simple wisdom, and the importance of asking questions instead of demanding answers. "Not know the answer," Dane said. His voice sounded small in the vast space, but the translators carried it to every ear. "I want to be clear about that. I did not solve the riddle. I am not smarter than the champion standing beside me. I could never do the mathematics that does or the logic that practices." Champion exchanged confused glances. This was not what they had expected. "But I think I understand something about the riddle that they do not," Dane continued. "I think the riddle is a trap. Every answer destroys itself." Paused, gathering his thoughts. Consider the answers that have been given. Time, infinity, tomorrow. Each one seems to fit the description at first, but when you examine them closely, they all fall apart. Time does arrive. Infinity can be used. Tomorrow does exist even when it becomes today. "You know this?" the interrupted. "We rejected those answers for exactly these reasons. What is your point?" Nodded respectfully. "My point is that every possible answer has the same problem. No matter what thing you name, you can find a reason why it does not fit perfectly. The riddle is designed to reject all answers." Crowd began murmuring again. Dane pressed on before he could lose his nerve. "Grandfather was a farmer. He never left Earth. He never learned advanced mathematics or philosophy, but he taught me something that I think applies here. He said the best answer to any question is another question. He said wisdom is not about knowing answers. Wisdom is about knowing which questions have no answers." Slowly, encouraging Dane to continue. "Believe this riddle has no answer," Dane said. "I believe it was never meant to be solved. The test was never about finding the right answer. The test was about recognizing that some things cannot be conquered by intellect alone." Hall erupted. Beings shouted and argued. The delegation demanded an explanation. They accused Dane of cheating. The collective pulsed with visible distress. Raised his forearms, and silence fell immediately. "Dane Cole is correct," he said. Words hung in the air like a physical weight. 600 years, I have watched the greatest minds in the galaxy attack my riddle. They have used every tool at their disposal. They have spent years of their lives trying to solve what I posed, and every single one of them made the same mistake. Walked to the center of the stage. Assumed the riddle had an answer. They assumed their intellect was sufficient to find it. They never considered the possibility that the riddle was a mirror, reflecting back their own limitations. Step forward, you tricked us. You wasted our time with an impossible puzzle. You replied gently. I taught you that not all problems can be solved. I taught you that sometimes the response to question is to question the question itself. I taught you that knowledge has boundaries, and wisdom means knowing where those boundaries lie. "It is unacceptable," they declared. His skin had turned almost black with fury. "My species has spent resources and time preparing for this symposium. We sent our grace mind, and now you tell us it was all meaningless." "Not meaningless," Dane said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him again. "The riddle taught you something valuable. It taught you that your mathematics cannot explain everything. That is important knowledge." Important sneered. "Important for whom?" "Everyone. Every species here believes their way of thinking is the best. They believe in mathematics. They believe in logic. They believe in collective reasoning. But the universe does not care about our beliefs. The universe has mysteries that cannot be solved by any method. If we cannot accept that, we will spend eternity chasing answers that do not exist." Hall fell quiet again. Dane saw expression changing among the crowd. The anger was fading, replaced by something that looked like thoughtfulness. Bowder stood up from her seat. "May I speak?" Nodded. "If what Dane has said reflects a truth about humanity that other species often overlook, we are young. We have only been part of the galactic community for 40 years. We do not have the mathematical traditions of the or the logical frameworks of the, but perhaps our youth is our strength. We have not yet forgotten how to be uncertain. We have not yet built walls around our knowledge that prevent us from admitting what we do not know." Turn to face the other delegations. "Cole is not our human. He is not our most accomplished scientist or our most brilliant philosopher. He is a translator who asks good questions. And today, asking good questions was more valuable than having good answers." Alden, for the first time Dane could remember, the ancient philosopher looked genuinely happy. 600 years said, this young human is the first being to truly understand. He understood not through intelligence but through humility, not through knowledge but through wonder. He is the first to recognize that the riddle was never a test of intellect. It was a test of wisdom. Raised his forearm toward the ceiling. "Test is over, and humanity has passed." Crowd did not cheer. The moment was too profound for celebration, but Dane saw something in the eyes of the beings around him that he had never seen before. Respect. Respect earned not through power, technology, or ancient traditions, but through the simple willingness to admit what he did not know. Cole, translator and assistant, had just taught the galaxy a lesson that 600 years of geniuses had failed to learn. And all it took was asking the right question. That followed was unlike anything Danny had experienced in his life. News of the symposium spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. His face appeared on broadcasts from 1,000 different worlds. His words were translated in languages that had no human speakers. His name was spoken in halls of power and humble homes alike. And he hated every moment of it. Never wanted fame. He had never sought attention. He was a translator who liked quiet rooms and difficult documents, and the satisfaction of finding exactly the right word to bridge the gap between two ways of thinking. Now he could not walk through the academy without being stopping him to shake his hand or ask for photographs or request his opinion on matters he knew nothing about. Esther handled the diplomatic consequences with her usual skill. The initial anger from other delegations faded as they reflected on what had actually happened, and not cheated them. He had given them a gift, even if it was a gift they had not wanted to receive. So if wisdom met on the 5th day after the assembly, they debated for hours before reaching their decision. Humanity would be granted an advisory position on the council, not as a reward for solving the riddle, but in recognition of the lesson they had taught. It was a lesser honor than a permanent seat, but for a species that had achieved interstellar travel only 40 years ago, it was remarkable. Lisa Park found Danny sitting alone in the garden where he had first spoken with. She sat down beside him without speaking and watched the bioluminescent flowers open and close in their endless dance. Should have seen it, she said finally. The answer was so obvious, a riddle with no answer, a test of humility, not intelligence. We're doing what you were trained to do, Dan replied. You approach it as a problem to be solved. That is not a failure. That is just how you were taught to think. But you saw through it how? Thought about the question for a long moment. I do not think I am smarter than you, Dr. Park. I think I am just different. You have spent your life looking for answers. I have spent my life looking for connections. When I heard the riddle, I did not think about what the answer might be. I thought about why someone would ask such a question in the first place. The Park nodded slowly. Different approaches for different problems. Exactly. The galaxy has plenty of beings who can find answers. Maybe what it needs are more beings who can find the right question. He smiled at that and patted his shoulder before leaving him alone with his thoughts. The final day of the symposium requested a private meeting with Danny. They met in the same garden where everything had begun, under the same soft blue light of the glowing plants. The small box made of crystal. He held it carefully in two of his 4 hands as he approached Danny. I have something for you, the ancient philosopher said. A gift that I have been waiting 600 years to give. In the box, inside lay a small crystal, no bigger than a marble, that glowed with inner light. Symbols were etched into its surface, symbols in a language that Danny did not recognize. It contained the riddle in its original form, explained. It was the first riddle I ever posed, long before I understood what it would become. I have carried it with me across the galaxy, waiting for someone who deserved to hold it. He shook his head. I cannot accept this. I am not worthy of such a gift. Or exactly worthy. You are worthy because you do not believe you are worthy. That is the point, Dan Cole. Wisdom belongs to those who know they do not possess it. Knowledge belongs to those who understand how little they know. Pressed the crystal into Dane's palm. It felt warm, almost alive. Said on some day said, when you meet someone who is ready to wonder, give them this crystal and tell them what it means. Continue the tradition I have started. Well, I know when someone is ready. Well, you will know because they will ask questions instead of giving answers, just as you did. Posium ended with a closing ceremony that felt anticlimactic after everything that had happened. Species that had arrived as rivals departed as something closer to colleagues. Not friends, perhaps, but beings who had shared an experience that changed how they saw themselves. Returned to Earth 3 weeks later. His ship landed at the same port he had departed from, but everything felt different. The buildings seemed smaller. The sky seemed closer. He had touched something vast during his time away, and ordinary life felt slightly unreal by comparison. Back to work at the translation office. His colleagues treated him with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, unsure how to behave around someone who had become famous on a galactic scale. Dane did his best to be the same person he had always been. He arrived on time, did his work carefully, and went home in the evenings to his small one. His first free day, he took a transport to Kansas. The wheat fields stretched golden under a blue sky, exactly as he remembered from childhood. His grandfather's grave sat on a small hill overlooking the land he had farmed for 60 years. He knelt beside the headstone and played a single flower against the withered stone. I thought of you, he said quietly. When everything was happening, when I was standing in front of all those beings, I thought of what you taught me. The best answer to any question is another question. You were right, Grandpa. You were always right. Wind rustled through the wheat, making a sound that might have been a grunt. He stayed until sunset, then returned to his life. The years passed. He continued his work as a translator. He occasionally gave lectures about his experience at the symposium, though he always felt uncomfortable doing so. He declined offers of promotion and fame, preferring his quiet existence to the spotlight. The crystal with him everywhere he went. Sometimes he would hold it up to the light and watch the symbols glow. Sometimes he would close his eyes and imagine its ancient voice speaking the riddle in its original form. Years after the symposium, Danny found himself teaching a class of young students about. Most of them were eager to become diplomats or scientists or explorers. They saw language as a tool for achieving their ambition. The student was different. She was a small girl named Maya with curious eyes and a habit of asking questions that made Danny think deeply. While other students sought answers, Maya sought understanding. While others wanted to know what, she wanted to know why. Class one day, Maya approached Danny's desk. She held a paper with the riddle written on it, the famous riddle that had made Danny famous decades ago. Mr. Cole, she said, I do not understand something about your riddle. He smiled. It is not my riddle, I did not create it. But you understood it, everyone says so. What do you not understand? I looked at the paper, frowning in concentration. Everyone says the riddle has no answer, but that does not seem right to me. The riddle itself is the answer. The question is the answer. I asking the riddle was teaching people to question. So the answer is the question. The question is the answer. I felt his heart skip a beat. He reached into his pocket and touched the crystal that had lived there for 20 years. He said, would you stay after the others leave? I have something I want to give you. Nodded, confused but curious. They were alone. Dane placed the crystal on his desk. Maya's eyes went wide as the inner light reflected off her face. This crystal contains the riddle in its original language, Dane said. A very old and very wise being gave it to me a long time ago. He told me to pass it on when I found someone who was ready to wonder. I do not understand. He smiled. You said the question is the answer. That is what was trying to teach. That is what I understood all those years ago. The riddle has no solution because the riddle is the solution. Asking is more important than answering. Wondering is more valuable than knowing. He pushed the crystal toward her. This, carry it with you, and someday when you meet someone who is ready to wonder, pass it on to them. I picked up the crystal carefully, holding it like the treasure it was. How will I know when someone is ready? He laughed softly. It was the same question he had asked so many years ago. Well, no, he said, because they will ask questions instead of giving answers. Smiled, and in her smile Danny saw the future of humanity straightening out across the stars. A future built not on answers but on question, not on certainty but on wonder, not on knowledge but on wisdom. The riddle lived on. In the end, that was all that mattered.